Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be back here. Speaking to this group, there's a lot of familiar faces. And in a way, I feel like I'm speaking to the choir, but there's always something more to know. So I'm going to be talking about urban wetlands today. And I'm defining these as ones that are in a developed area, maybe embraced by a road or campus or neighborhood, as opposed to the wetlands that are a little farther out. We have a lot of wonderful state park wetlands, and there's a lot of Harris County flood control projects, which could be their own talk. But I want to bring light to some of these maybe hidden or new wetlands and talk about their benefits as well. So let's have a look at some of these wetlands, and I'm going to talk about the benefits, the ecological benefits of having these wetlands in a setting with a high population, either suburban or urban, and as I go. So let's have a look. This is me. So there are so many benefits to wetlands. I wanted to break them apart and kind of spread them throughout the talk. The first set really deals with some of the physical environmental. Water quality is the driver for a lot of the wetlands that have been created or preserved in this area. And they're essentially used as maybe kidneys, I guess, is an analogy that's been used often, but they're used almost like machines in created settings to remove hydrocarbons from roadways, excess fertilizer, sediment from new construction, just a host of contaminants that find their way into stormwater runoff and subsequently find their way into bayous and into the bay, where they cause fish kills and oyster bans and beach closures and all sorts of nasty things like that. A lot of the projects that you're going to see are demonstrations of how we can begin to manage the stormwater runoff better before it reaches the bodies of water. Others are just there for habitat, and almost every site is a multifunction site. Water quantity is also an important aspect of having wetlands around us. And finally, air quality. Just if only for the fact that wetland is not an area that's being mowed on a weekly basis. Mowing is important, or maintenance of some kind is important for wetlands, but maybe once or twice a year we'll do it. So I want to start by setting the stage here. This is a kind of a typical landscape that I found. I say typical in that it's what you would have found in this area decades or hundreds of years ago. This object right here, and these here and here, are prairie pothole wetlands. And you can see in this 1944 satellite image, they really do look like potholes. The experience of them on the ground is very different, but there's quite a few of them here in sort of different intensities, maybe different depths, and planting material in each one of them. You can see some development here, and you can see that the farming has made its impression on the land, on the surface of the land. But a lot of this land is undeveloped. It's never been plowed. It's probably never been drained. You can see all kinds of interesting features. One of the interesting things here is that this is a bayou, and the trees stick to the bayou. This is what we call a gallery forest. So originally, you may have found isolated motts of trees, but generally they were right around the bayou because the prairie was a fire-dependent habitat and ecosystem, and so trees that would begin in the prairie often ended up burning. So this is typically where you found the trees, right? So you would have found this all through the region from Louisiana down almost nearly to the border, landscape similar to this. So this was from a 1944 aerial photo. That's about as far back as you can get on Google Maps. But it's a lot of fun if you have access to Google Earth to dial back and see what the landscape looked like back in the day. So let's look at this fast forward in time. same site, right? So what you have here is Greens Bayou, because this is Greens Point. It's Greens Point Mall, the Beltway 45. So what a change, right? I'm just going to go back so you can experience that again. See? See, the bayou's been straightened. The trees are gone. Some of these people have prairie potholes under their houses or in their landscapes. And they may never know why their landscape is peculiar. And this has happened hundreds, if not thousands of times around this, region that we live in. So I wanted to bring that to your awareness. I'm going to talk about wetlands, and there's maybe 9, 10, 11 of them, so it seems like there's a lot of examples out there. But just think of how much has been lost and how precious each one of these examples is. I'm grouping these wetlands into various categories. The first is the preserved wetlands, and then we'll look at treatment wetlands and mitigation wetlands, and finally wetland landscapes. The first are ones that have never been plowed, never been drained, never been planted with something else or had construction over them. Very unusual anymore. So looking again at the Google Maps 1944 image, you see again there's a bayou here with lots of gallery forests along it. There's some rice farming happening here, but a lot of the land is undisturbed. I'm not sure what's going on right there, but keep your eye on that. See, there's 2 prairie potholes right there. Okay, so this is today. It's Armand Bayou, and this is the Clear Lake area. Pine Brook Wetlands is the neighborhood right here. And this is the reserve, which is being constructed now. And these 2 prairie potholes survived and became the focus of this neighborhood. So now let's go down to the ground and see what they look like. It's Pine Brook Wetlands. This is a nice photo that was taken in the fall of one year. So you see lots of sugarcane plume grass here. There's an observation deck, and there's boardwalks all through the woods that surround these potholes. It's the center of a park, so if you go far enough outside the park, there'll be the ball fields, the tennis courts, and the swimming pools, but it's a really fascinating little oasis right here. Almost the same picture in the spring. You can see it's very lush, and it's got open water. Some volunteers who are looking, they're collecting seeds at this time, but generally you can explore by boardwalk and go through the forest, and it'll bring you out to the wetlands from time to time, place to place. In this picture, there's a persimmon here, lots of spike rush, and the volunteers are finding, although it looks like it's just a field of green, there's so many species in here, and just a few inches of water. Looking from the other side of the park, I think you can see the boardwalk over here. It's a field of lizard tail in bloom. It's really quite stunning. The park was replanted in part. It had a lot of tallow, and so volunteers removed tallows. It was replanted after the tallow was removed. So there are a few things that are kind of missteps, like these cannas back here are Canna indica, so not native to our area. But there's a lot of really cool stuff in the seed load in this area. And one of them is the yellow-eyed grass. Kind of an odd sort of thing. You don't see it very much. Has anybody seen it in the wild before? Yeah? Okay, so it's pretty scarce. I would love to propagate it and grow it because it's quite beautiful. You see the form of it. There's 2 forms in this pothole. There's kind of a shorter one, and it's in bloom. I'm sorry, I didn't get a better picture of that. But they have different seed heads, like that. So another preserve is the Benoit Prairie Preserve down in League City. This is named after Dick Benoit, Texas master naturalist extraordinaire. And it's about, I think, 40 acres that was preserved. This photo was taken yesterday after it was mowed. It gets mowed once a year, and it happened to be that my friend Diane Humes was out there taking photos for me. and got to ride around on the mower. She really enjoyed that. But you can see that this is part of a neighborhood. It doesn't look like a very exceptional kind of neighborhood, but within their neighborhood, they have 40 acres of prairie with pothole wetlands in them. You can see this is holding water. I don't think it has rained there recently, but it's holding water, and there's spike rush in there. This is an aerial it's from the real estate company that's selling these two parcels. So at one point, this all would have been contiguous, and unfortunately, these will probably be something else, right? But here's the nature preserve. It was also preserved as mitigation for Highway 96, which is running through. It does have a few mottes of Chinese tallow, unfortunately, but I think the mowing is going to go a long way to preventing more of that. And this is what mows it. Yeah. Cool, huh? Another look, looking into the Chinese tallow. There's prairie plantain. I know there's a lot of good stuff out there. Has anybody been out there to collect seed or explore? Oh, okay. It has spring spider lilies. You can see in the spring when they bloom around the low spots, it kind of highlights with white flowers where the prairie potholes are. It's an easy thing to propagate too. After the bloom, these bulbils is the botanical name, drop to the ground, and they look like green covered chocolate almonds, and propagate pretty easily too. More benefits. We hear a lot about wetlands and their association with floods, and wetland land is a good way to manage small to medium storms. Most of our storms in this area are under 2 inches. Like in the 90 percentile, you have storms under 2 inches, and series of wetlands or other green infrastructure can take care of that. So you often see wetlands now put into Harris County flood control sites. It's a wonderful way to get the duplicity of wetland or other water storage and water quality. But also having a wetland in a body of water allows for more water to be transpired through evapotranspiration than without. So it's another way to get water off the land when you need it to. And I should say all of these ecological benefits are being quantified. You can actually put a dollar number on this, and it's not my work, it's more of HARC or the Speed Center, and I would encourage you to go to their websites and explore the dollar sign that's associated with ecological benefits. Our next series of wetlands are treatment wetlands. These are ones that are specifically for, well, one of their specific functions is to improve water quality. But the best treatment wetlands also have a multiplicity of function in that they're also habitat, they're also park space, and so let's have a look at some of those. MD Anderson has several planted stormwater ponds in addition to the prairies that you may have heard about being established there. The philosophy is that the landscape of the hospital, which is about 220 acres in the medical center, should be managed as healthfully as possible. And so that's in accord with the objectives of the hospital. And whenever they have a parking lot expansion, which kicks off the need to have a flood control basin, they would like to have wetlands in them. Some of these parking lot expansions are pretty small because, as you can imagine, the medical center is pretty well built out. So we're talking about 2,300 square foot, 3,000 square foot basins, something like that. So it's pushing the size limit for a treatment wetland. But I think that they're doing well, and Texas A&M will be putting water quality monitors on them to study the improvements. Each one of them is associated with a parking lot. This is the smaller one at the medical support facility. After construction, it was not maintained as well as it could be. So it was overrun by cattails, which is a problem in a small basin. You get cattails very, very thickly, and you lose the diversity, and then you get mosquitoes as well. So the process of getting the cattails out has been about a year. We tried herbicide with mixed results and felt like we could do just as well in a small space by removing them manually. So we're beginning to see this, the form of the wetlands emerging. There's two small basins here, and lots of blue stem, and you know, the deeper basins here are showing up and with the different plant species. Another one nearby is at the UT Research Park. This parking lot here was expanded, which required the detention basin. The inflow is here. There's a deep pool, which right now is covered, in this photo I should say, is covered with water lilies. And the slopes were planted with seed mixes for wildflowers and native seeds. They always want to put signs for education so that people can see that this is not a neglected landscape, because some people will look at this and say it's a mistake. I don't see how that happens, but that is the perception. If the grass is tall, it must be cut, you know. So the sign goes a long way to informing people that this is an intentional landscape, and here is why. Another view. Let's see the parking lot there. It runs back, and this rough area is the outflow. It's kind of a relaxed U shape. We are pulling out invasive species here. It could be overrun with cattail as well. We don't want to see that happen. Deep-rooted sedge, and aggressive natives too, like willow. The cattail would be in that category as well. One of the aggressive plants that's doing extremely well there is the yellow water lily. It's you know, in a small space and very happy there. It's a great plant if you have a large space or if you don't mind keeping it restrained in a small space. Here's the blossom. You can see that there are native bees that love it. Also called banana water lily because the root has a kind of a cluster that's yellow like a banana, and maybe the flower as well. Mason Park Marsh was one of the first stormwater treatment wetlands in Houston. It's on the east end, about 75th Street, and it is a series of ponds that take water off a nearby neighborhood, and it integrates well with the park, especially now that there is a pedestrian bridge connecting the far side of the park to the wetland side of the park. This is the deep pools, we call it the first stage, and beautiful iconic bridge which attracts a lot of people. It's really lovely to visit the park and see the changes that this bridge has brought. The second pool is shallower. The water moves in a train from that deep pool where sediments drop out to a shallower pool where lots of the nutrients can be taken up. Hydrocarbons, heavy metals, and so forth get incorporated into the plants. And then the third pool is adjacent to the bayou. This train trestle runs over the bayou, and it's tidally influenced. So when the tide comes up, the water flows out. It's a neat design, but there's something kind of finicky about the way that the bayou wants to run. This area is completely created. It wasn't a natural area. It was completely redone in order to develop this shelf for the stormwater wetland. But if the rain is high enough, the water will bypass the curve in the bayou and go right through the wetland. The notable plant I want to point out in this location is buttonbush. It's happy in the water. It's happy in the dry, near sidewalk areas. It blooms wonderfully, and it's a great pollinator, and it smells good too. It can be kind of a tree or it can be a shrub. It would be easy to grow in a low spot or I think in regular garden soil as well. Exploration Green is another stormwater treatment wetland. It's a flood-controlled facility down in Clear Lake City that once was a golf course. But I was going to show you people who are walking in the park, but I may have deleted that slide. The point of that is that people who are in the park don't perceive it as a stormwater detention facility. It's just a nice place to walk, and it's right in their neighborhood. This is from the outflow of the lake. What you see is just one small portion. It kind of goes around this old geological service building and has a large area in the back. It's a 5-phase project. Phase 1 is completed, and phase 2 is under construction. So if you go, you'll be visiting phase 1. It's about a mile loop around. You can see wetlands almost all the way. And part of the project, the wetlands are rather shallow here. So this was a habitat island that was put in this phase. Each one of the 5 phases will have a habitat island. But because of engineering, having to push and pull things around, the slopes turned out to be pretty steep here, 3-to-1. It's hard to get a wetland on a slope like that. And the result has been erosion of this island. So I think going forward in the subsequent phases, that slope will be adjusted. And the more wetland shelf you can get, the better. Let me go back. So this is a broad wetland shelf here. This is what you want with a treatment wetland. You don't want a margin so that water that's coming in can bypass the wetland. You want to make sure that all the water that is coming into the system has to spend a requisite amount of time in the wetland so that it can be treated. A plant that you'll see a lot of here are southern blue flag iris. It's a beautiful plant that blooms in March, and I especially like it because nutria don't eat it. And it stays green in the winter. So it's just an excellent plant, I think. We got our plants, I say we because I'm referring back to my time with Texas A&M, and we did the planting at the wetland. The plants came from the Brazoria National Wildlife Refuge. Houston Arboretum has a stormwater wetland in the parking lot, and y'all may have seen that in previous meetings if you were attending. I won't go into that much, but it has a function of taking water from the parking lot and being a really attractive entry to the park, as well as supplying irrigation water. And I suppose if they needed it for a fire, the water would be there as well. I think that was actually one of the functions. So this wetland does it all. So mitigation wetlands. These are a class of wetlands that are created in order to mitigate for some that are lost. Wetlands are protected, certain wetlands I should say, are protected by the Clean Water Act. And so when one is permitted to fill a wetland and develop a wetland, ideally what is supposed to happen is that you mitigate a wetland or preserve a wetland in another location. So these next 2 projects will be ones that are beneficiaries of that process. Out in Sugar Land, there's a wetland park in a neighborhood. Does anybody recognize this place? Have you been here? Okay, yeah. I just find it amazing. I was just fascinated to visit. It's in, again, a neighborhood that is fairly typical, right? But it's got this park that is just exuberant in its wetland planting, and it invites people to play. So what you see right here, this number 20, is at the stone skipping station. And that is 20 feet or 20 yards, and the 40 is out here as well.
Wow.
Yeah, and so you can see that this park has got, there's a pavilion here, lovely multiple levels inviting you to explore, and finding bollards that have information in them, as well as help you to get oriented around the park. There's a mud pie kitchen for those of you mud pie cooks. And I love how the wetland comes right up. And this is like a really nice marsh. It was planted, but it's filled in really well. It's in large swaths like you see in nature. Every now and then you'll see something like spider lily. This is not our spider lily. It's not the spring spider lily that you see in, say, the Dick Benoit Prairie. But they're trying. Just over a levee from the park is another sort of wetland like this, and I took a picture because it shows that you can have your lake, your manicured lake with dived water, coexist with a wetland. I don't know why you'd want to, but there it is, and I like that, the synthesis of styles. This actually functions, Along the margins, though, you'll see encroaching plants. There's the Brazilian vervain, and this is Baccharis, which was a native, but it's an opportunist, and Eupatorium and Johnson grass here. And it just points out the importance of maintenance crews knowing what kind of plants are growing there. It's between the mowed areas and the planted areas, and it's just emerging. It's kind of a make or break thing for a project to be able to remove the plants that are not supposed to be there and encourage the plants that are. A plant that you see there that I like to highlight is scarlet rose mallow. It kind of has this marijuana-looking leaf and this really beautiful, showy flower, which is probably edible. Does anybody know if it's edible? Tried it? A lot of hibiscus you can eat. Yeah, okay. I'm not encouraging anyone to eat things you don't know, but...
Especially if it looks like marijuana.
I'd try the flower. I wouldn't smoke the leaf. And again, you can see how close the neighborhood is and how beautifully wild the landscape is. El Franco Lee Park is also a mitigation site. It's next to Clear Lake City, and looking at the Google Maps again, you can see that it's kind of been wet for decades and was a rice farm. And it was preserved as parkland for mitigation for the intercontinental airport construction. So it's got I don't know how big the whole park is. It's hundreds of acres, and the wetland portion itself is 100 acres. So you go through the part of the park that is all ball fields and dumpsters and that business, and then you get to this wet prairie back here with lots of Bryncospora in it, and there's a observation deck with levers up there, and a boardwalk takes off over here. It's a nice place to visit in the evening. As you walk around the boardwalk, you'll be in some wooded areas. You'll walk along some drainage canals. You'll walk along Clear Creek. It's quite thickly wooded. And then you also find lots of Thalia dealbata. This is related, well, it's in the same genus as our native Thalia. This is Thalia geniculata, or red flag or bent flag. Our native is powdery alligator flag. And there may have been some confusion about which one to put in this area, or they may have taken heart by the fact that this seems to be native in the southeast, like Georgia and Florida and the Caribbean. But the result is that we have places that are dwarfed by the Thalia geniculata, the red flag, and it goes on for acres. So there's some sesbania. It's remarkable, almost like a monoculture of these two species, but the water is clear underneath. So there's that. But I noticed the site right at that little gazebo that speaks about the wetland enhancement. And so I just point out the hazards of enhancement. If you're not careful, you get acres and acres of one plant. That was in 2015 is the date there. So that plant presumably has grown in like that in 4 years. Walking further, you see there's a nice cattail marsh mixed with other spikerush. And yeah, I hear somebody laughing, but you know, cattails in the right place really are wonderful. They're natives. I spoke badly about them before, but it's all about where you put them. And this is a good place for them. Back there is Dobie High School, and the Beltway is nearby. It's a fairly urban area, but when you're back in the wetlands, it's quite, it feels like a refuge. A plant that you'll see a lot of blooming there now is blue waterleaf. This is a cool plant because it's so showy and so durable. It has thorns, which is kind of unusual for wetland plants. Not a lot of thorns, but they're there. And this one is a nice blue. I've seen some that were so intensely blue and so fireproof, I would say. Maybe literally fireproof, but I mean in the sense of being very durable. Once working at Sheldon Lake State Park during the drought in 2011, I saw some blue plastic in the distance, so I went to pick it up and it turned out to be this. This was blooming and looking really good amongst all the other dried grasses and suffering prairie. So this is tough. All right, some more benefits. We're probably well aware of habitat for wildlife. It's also habitat for humans, and the association between mental health and, of course, physical health and having green spaces that we can go to is more and more known all the time. And this was our native landscape, the coastal prairies and the wetlands. They're astonishingly beautiful, and I have been with people who have been depressed, and you take them out to the prairie, and there's a transformation, at least for that time. It's what I call prairie or pond therapy. It's important. And so, you know, aesthetics and health are also closely linked, and I think that we get them from the wetlands. People maybe have to be trained to see that, but it's not the wetlands' fault. The last category is wetland landscapes. So these are created landscapes, and they have aspects of wetlands that they highlight. Midtown Park is a new park on Travis Street, and it's got a bayou kind of reference in it on the north side of the park, and it has some green infrastructure in that it will hold water. You can see that it can take rainwater up to about this, I don't know if this was 3-4 feet, and then it goes to some kind of drain system here. It's got native plants in the bottom. It kind of looks like bayou water, right? And it recirculates. So it's kind of an educational feature. There's signage and native plants, and it's also quite beautiful. Right to the side here is this busy street, but when you're at the bridges over the wetlands, looking into the wetlands, it just seems like a different place. There are also bioswales, which are a fancy way of saying ditches that handle water and purify the water before it goes to the storm drain, and the storm drain goes to the bayou, etc. And they planted iris here and Virginia sweetspire. There's an outlet right there. On this side is a big lawn, so it's kind of a typical park in that sense. And on the north side is this kids' playground and this hidden bayou. It's definitely worth a visit. Its notable plant is bushy bluestem. I was really happy to see it highlighted like this, put it in the spotlight, because often it's perceived as a kind of a weedy plant. But just look at it. Yolanda Black Navarro Buffalo Bayou Nature Park is in the east end. It's another created park. It was a construction fill site along the bayou, a brownfield site. And now it's a series of 3 ponds. This is a little bit soft focused, I'm sorry, but it's a good pano to show you the relation of the ponds here and the wetlands and then the bayou beyond. It's surrounded by boulevards and more industrial areas. And the bike lanes are connecting it to the rest of the city. So it's definitely an urban park. It doesn't look like it when you're there. It doesn't feel like it. This photograph is a photograph of the information sign here. It mentions the planting by the volunteers. A lot of the parks that we were looking at were planted by volunteers. It was a community effort. And they all seem to start like this. See, it's bare, compacted soil, and not much is growing there. Here, these ladies are planting water canna, or canna glauca, and that's the highlighted plant for this site. It's a little bit of an unusual plant. We see it in some places. I think it's been propagated and shared more often now. It's a neat plant, but it always looks a little bit ragged like this because, you know, skippers and lots of organisms, I'm looking at you, Katie. Lots of organisms depend on this plant. Just briefly, another few of these wetland landscapes. It's not really a wetland, but of course it is showcasing some of the plants and some of the functions of the wetland. This is the expanded Texas Wetlands exhibit at the zoo, and some of our plants are in here. This was early on. They're still doing construction here. Has anybody been to this exhibit? Yeah, okay. I can't wait to go now. Now I've had the backstage view. I want to see it as a visitor.
A lot of algae in that when we were there Tuesday.
Oh, okay. Well, I would say being a new lake, it's got to balance itself and, you know, get its chemistry right. So that's interesting.
Very pretty.
And in addition, Discovery Green's Kinder Lake has a fringe of wetlands and really nice lizard tail, and then I think it's Louisiana iris based on the blooms here. But it's nice to see that kind of wetland incorporated into a very designed park like this. So I just wanted to recap these numerous wetland benefits of the parks. I hope that you're interested and would like to go and visit some of these parks. And I hope that you would also become advocates for wetlands. There's still a negative perception about wetlands, and I feel like that's changing. And the more that we can visit parks and promote and speak out about them, the better. All right, so I know there's other projects out there, and I'd love to hear about those from time to time, so feel free to contact me.
We're good here, so.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Appreciate it.